London, 1845. Winifred Grayson clutched the tattered letter in her trembling hands as the carriage wheels crunched over the gravel driveway of Thornfield Manor. The imposing stone mansion loomed ahead, its Gothic spires piercing the grey English sky like accusing fingers. Each rotation of the wheels brought her closer to a future she had never imagined nor desired. A governess, she whispered to herself, the word still foreign on her tongue. How quickly one falls. 6 months ago she had been Miss Winifred Grayson, daughter of Colonel James Grayson, respected in London's finest drawing rooms. Now, her father lay cold in his grave, his debts revealed, and their modest but respectable townhouse sold to satisfy creditors. Her mother had retreated to a distant cousin's home in Scotland, unable to face the humiliation of their downfall. And Winifred, with her accomplished education but no marriage prospects at 23, had no choice but to seek employment. The carriage halted. Through the window she observed the immaculate gardens and the stone balustrades adorning the grand entrance. Thornfield Manor, ancestral home of the Duke of Ravenswood, stood as a monument to old money and privilege, everything she had lost. Wealth preserves one from life's cruelties, she murmured, smoothing her plain grey dress, once her second-best walking gown, now her finest possession. And those without must simply endure them. The footman opened the door. Winifred stepped down, clutching her small valise, which contained all that remained of her former life, a few books, her mother's cameo, and dresses hastily altered to appear more suitable for a governess. Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, greeted her at the servants' entrance, a humiliation Winifred had anticipated but still found difficult to bear. Miss Grayson, the older woman said, eyeing her critically. We expected you an hour ago. The coach was delayed at Millbrook, Winifred replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. I apologize for any inconvenience. Mrs. Winters led her through the servants' corridors, explaining household rules with brisk efficiency. You'll take your meals in your room, except Sundays when staff dines together. The children's schoolroom is on the east wing, 3rd floor. Lady Caroline is 8, Master Philip is 6. You are not to wander into the west wing, that is His Grace's private domain. His Grace is in residence. Winifred asked, surprised. She had been told the Duke spent most of his time in London. His Grace returned to Thornfield 3 months ago and has not left since, Mrs. Winters replied, her voice dropping. Not since the accident. Accident? Mrs. Winters pressed her lips together. It is not my place to discuss His Grace's affairs. You are here to educate the children, Miss Grayson. That is your only concern. Winifred nodded, properly chastised, though curiosity burned within her. The Duke of Ravenswood, Eve Ravenscroft, was something of a mystery in London society. Once known as a charming, if somewhat reserved aristocrat, he had withdrawn from public life in recent years. Rumour swirled of a tragedy, but details remained elusive in the gossip circles Winifred had once frequented. Her small attic room was clean but sparse, a narrow bed, a washstand, and a tiny desk beneath a dormer window that overlooked the vast estate. Winifred unpacked her few belongings, arranging her books on the windowsill, Shakespeare, Austen, and several volumes of poetry that had been her companions through recent hardships. This is your life now, she told herself firmly, fighting back tears. Your past is gone. You are no longer a gentleman's daughter, but a servant. Accept it with dignity. That evening, she met her charges. Lady Caroline, a solemn child with golden curls and her father's deep blue eyes, regarded Winifred with suspicion. Master Philip, mischievous and lively, seemed determined to test her patience immediately. Our last governess left after a fortnight, Philip announced proudly. I put a frog in her tea. Did you indeed? Winifred replied, meeting his gaze steadily. Then I must remember to check my cup before drinking. Caroline watched her carefully. Papa says we're to mind you, but I don't see why. You're not a lady anymore, are you? The child's words pierced Winifred's heart with their simple cruelty. I am your governess, Lady Caroline, she answered evenly. And while I may not be of your social standing, I am still worthy of basic courtesy. The girl flushed slightly. I apologize, Miss Grayson. Apology accepted. Now, shall we discuss what you've been studying? The first week passed in a blur of lessons, strict routines, and adjustments to her new station. Winifred found the children intelligent but neglected. Their education had been sporadic, interrupted by a succession of governesses who rarely lasted more than a month. Behind their difficult behavior, she sensed loneliness and insecurity. She had not yet encountered the Duke. According to whispers among the servants, he rarely left his private study, taking meals alone and seeing no one except his steward and valet. Until one stormy night, when everything changed. Winifred had been at Thornfield for nearly a fortnight when she woke to the smell of smoke. Alarmed, she threw on her dressing gown and rushed into the hallway. Smoke curled beneath the door of the west wing, the Duke's forbidden domain. Without hesitation, she ran toward it, her heart pounding. The corridor was filled with thickening smoke. She covered her mouth with her sleeve and pushed forward, reaching the Duke's chambers. She pounded on the door. Your Grace! Fire! Wake up! When no answer came, she tried the handle. Locked. Panic rising, she threw her weight against the door repeatedly until the ancient wood gave way. Inside, flames licked at the heavy curtains surrounding the four-poster bed. On the bed lay a figure, motionless. Your Grace, she cried, rushing to him. The Duke was unconscious, an overturned brandy decanter on the floor beside a fallen candle. She shook him roughly. Wake up! The room is on fire. His eyes fluttered open, striking blue, disoriented. What? We must leave immediately, she insisted, pulling at his arm. Can you stand? He staggered to his feet, leaning heavily against her. Winifred was shocked by the heat of his skin through his nightshirt, the smell of spirits on his breath. She wrapped her arm around his waist, guiding him toward the door as flames spread to the carpets. They stumbled into the corridor just as servants arrived with buckets of water. Mrs. Winters gasped at the sight of them, the governess in her nightclothes, supporting the Duke, who was barely conscious and dressed only in his nightshirt. His Grace needs a physician, Winifred said, ignoring the impropriety of their situation. He appears to have been drinking heavily, and the smoke. Take His Grace to the blue salon, Mrs. Winters ordered 2 footmen. I'll send for Dr. Wells immediately. She turned cold eyes on Winifred. Miss Grayson, your behavior is most inappropriate. Return to your room at once. I was merely, at once. Chastened, Winifred retreated to her attic room, trembling from both exertion and the realization of what she had done. She had entered the Duke's private chambers uninvited, seen him in a state of undress, and worse, seen him vulnerable, intoxicated. Such impropriety could cost her her position. Foolish, she muttered, pacing the small room. What were you thinking? Yet she could not regret her actions. Had she not intervened, the Duke might have perished in the fire. Surely that counted for something, even in a world governed by rigid rules of propriety. The next morning, Mrs. Winters summoned her to the housekeeper's parlor. Winifred prepared herself for dismissal, mentally calculating how long her meager savings might sustain her while she sought another position. His Grace wishes to see you, Mrs. Winters announced, clearly displeased. In the library. At once. Winifred's stomach clenched with anxiety as she followed the housekeeper through the grand main hall, a part of the house she rarely entered. The library door stood open, revealing a magnificent room lined with leather-bound volumes from floor to ceiling. The Duke stood by the window, his tall figure silhouetted against the morning light. As she entered, he turned, and Winifred had her first proper look at her employer. Eve Ravenscroft, the 7th Duke of Ravenswood, was younger than she had expected, perhaps 35, with aristocratic features and those striking blue eyes she remembered from the night before. His left temple bore a long scar that disappeared into his dark hair, and he carried himself with a slight stiffness, as though in pain. "Miss Grayson," he said, his deep voice cool and detached. "I understand I owe you my gratitude." Winifred curtsied. "I merely did what anyone would do, Your Grace." "Did you?" His gaze was penetrating. "I find most people do precisely what is expected of them and nothing more. You, however, disregarded explicit instructions to avoid the West Wing and entered my private chambers." "There was a fire, Your Grace," she replied, lifting her chin. "I thought saving your life more important than observing household rules." A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly masked. Bold words from a governess. "Would you prefer dishonest ones?" The moment the words left her mouth, Winifred knew she had overstepped. A governess did not speak so frankly to a duke. She braced herself for his anger. Instead, he studied her with renewed interest. "You were not always a governess, were you, Miss Grayson?" "No, Your Grace. My father was Colonel James Grayson of the 41st Regiment. He died 6 months ago." "And left you without provision?" The blunt assessment stung. "He left debts, Your Grace. The military pension died with him." The Duke nodded, as though confirming something to himself. "My children speak highly of you. Philip claims you are not boring, which I believe is his highest compliment." "The children are intelligent and eager to learn when properly engaged," she said, relieved by the change of subject. "They have potential that has been neglected." "By me, you mean?" "It wasn't a question." Winifred hesitated, torn between honesty and prudence. "Children need stability and attention, Your Grace. They have suffered a succession of governesses and limited parental guidance." His jaw tightened. "You overstep, Miss Grayson." "Forgive me, Your Grace." She lowered her eyes, cursing her impulsive tongue. A heavy silence fell between them. Finally, he spoke again, his tone measured. "You will join the children and me for dinner this evening." Winifred looked up, startled. "Your Grace?" "The children have requested it. As a reward for your heroism." His lips twisted on the word, as though it tasted bitter. 7 o'clock in the small dining room. "Yes, Your Grace." She curtsied again, confused by this unexpected turn. "That will be all." Dismissed, she retreated, her mind racing. Dinner with the Duke and the children was unprecedented. Governesses did not dine with the family. It was a boundary that separated the servants from their employers as surely as the different entrances they used. That evening, wearing her best dress, a plain blue muslin that had seen better days, Winifred nervously made her way to the small dining room. The children were already seated, Philip fidgeting with his silverware, Caroline watching the door expectantly. "Miss Grayson!" Philip exclaimed. "Papa said you saved his life from a terrible fire." "I merely woke his grace when I smelled smoke," she corrected gently, taking the seat a footman held for her. The servants extinguished the fire before it could do much damage. "But it was very brave," Caroline said solemnly. "Papa says you showed presence of mind when others might have hesitated." "Does he?" Winifred murmured, surprised. The Duke entered then, and they all rose. He nodded for them to be seated and took his place at the head of the table. Dinner was an uncomfortable affair. The children, unused to dining with their father, were on their best behavior but clearly tense. The Duke himself spoke little, observing his children as though they were curious specimens he was encountering for the first time. Winifred found herself filling the silence, drawing out the children with questions about their lessons, encouraging Philip to share what he had learned about Roman history and Caroline to discuss the poem she had memorized. Gradually, the atmosphere lightened. Philip grew animated, describing gladiatorial combat with unfortunate gestures involving his fork, making Caroline giggle despite her attempts at ladylike composure. "Miss Grayson says I have a talent for mathematics," Caroline told her father shyly. "She says ladies can excel in sciences as well as accomplishments." "Does she?" The Duke's gaze shifted to Winifred. "That is not a common view." "Perhaps not, Your Grace, but it is an accurate one," she replied. "Lady Caroline has a natural aptitude for logical reasoning. It would be a disservice to discourage it merely because of her sex. You have unconventional ideas about education, Miss Grayson. I believe in education that serves the student, not merely convention, Your Grace." She met his gaze steadily. "Each child has different strengths and interests. A wise teacher recognizes and nurtures them." Something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. "And what strengths have you identified in my son?" "Master Philip has a remarkable memory and gift for languages. He recited Latin verbs perfectly after hearing them only twice." Philip beamed at this praise. "Miss Grayson doesn't get angry when I ask questions, Papa." "Not like Mr. Headley did." The Duke frowned. "Mr. Headley?" "My tutor before the governesses started coming," Philip explained. "He rapped my knuckles with a ruler when I asked too many questions. He said curiosity was impertinence." A flash of genuine anger crossed the Duke's face. "Why was I not informed of this?" The children exchanged glances. "We tried to tell you, Papa," Caroline said quietly. "But you were busy." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. The Duke's expression shuttered closed, and he turned his attention back to his plate. The remainder of the dinner passed in relative silence. As they finished the final course, the Duke dismissed the children to the nursery. When they had gone, he poured himself a glass of brandy, not offering one to Winifred. "You have made an impression on my children, Miss Grayson," he said at last. "They seem happier. They are wonderful children, Your Grace. Intelligent, kind, and eager for approval." She hesitated, then added carefully, "particularly yours." His hand tightened around the crystal glass. "I am not blind to my failings as a father, Miss Grayson, whatever you may think." "I presume nothing about Your Grace's circumstances," she replied. "I merely observe that your children treasure any attention you bestow upon them. And you believe I bestow too little." His voice was dangerously soft. Winifred knew she was treading on perilous ground, but something, perhaps the memory of Caroline's wistful expression when speaking of her father, pushed her forward. "I believe, Your Grace, that grief can make prisoners of us all." His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "What do you know of my grief?" "Nothing specific, Your Grace. But I recognize its shadow. I have lived beneath it myself since my father died." She met his gaze directly. "The difference is that I have no one depending upon me for their happiness." For a moment, she thought she had gone too far. The Duke's expression darkened, and he set down his glass with deliberate control. "You forget yourself, Miss Grayson. You are employed to educate my children, not to offer unsolicited observations about my personal affairs." He stood, signaling the end of their conversation. "Good night." Winifred rose and curtsied, her cheeks burning with humiliation. "Good night, Your Grace. I apologize for overstepping." As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Miss Grayson." She looked back, bracing herself for dismissal. "The children's lessons. I wish to be informed of their progress. Weekly reports, if you please." Surprised, she nodded. "Of course, Your Grace. You may go." She departed, confused by the exchange. Had she angered him with her presumption, or had her words somehow penetrated his reserve? The Duke remained an enigma, grief-stricken and withdrawn, yet clearly intelligent and, despite his neglect, concerned for his children's welfare. Over the following weeks, a strange pattern emerged. Winifred submitted detailed reports of the children's education every Friday. By Monday morning, they would be returned with the Duke's comments, insightful questions and suggestions written in an elegant, slanting hand. Though they rarely spoke in person, a peculiar correspondence developed through these exchanged notes. The Duke questioned her teaching methods, recommended books from his library, and occasionally challenged her assessments of the children's abilities, always in precise, formal language that nonetheless revealed a keen mind and genuine interest. Winifred found herself looking forward to his responses, crafting her reports with increasing care, anticipating his questions and deliberately including points she knew would provoke thoughtful replies. Spring turned to summer. The children flourished under her care, and gradually, the Duke began to emerge from his seclusion. Occasionally, he joined them for riding lessons or observed their lessons from the doorway of the schoolroom, never entering but watching with intent interest. The servants whispered about the change. Mrs. Winters regarded Winifred with suspicion, while other staff members treated her with newfound respect. "His Grace hasn't shown such interest in the children since before the accident," she overheard one housemaid telling another. "Something's changed him." "It's that governess," came the reply. "They say she speaks to him as though he weren't a duke at all." Winifred pretended not to hear, but the conversation troubled her. She had not sought to influence the Duke, merely to serve his children well. If her forthrightness had somehow penetrated his grief, it was an unintended consequence. One afternoon in late July, while the children were at their riding lesson, Winifred took advantage of the rare free hour to explore the extensive gardens. The day was unusually warm, and she had removed her bonnet to enjoy the sunshine on her face when she rounded a hedge and came face to face with the Duke. He was seated on a stone bench beside a small fountain, a book open in his hands. At her appearance, he rose. "Miss Grayson." "Your Grace." "I apologize for disturbing you." She moved to replace her bonnet, suddenly conscious of the impropriety of being seen with her hair uncovered. "Leave it," he said abruptly. Then, more gently, "Please. The day is too fine for such formalities." Surprised, she lowered her hands. "I was taking advantage of the children's riding lesson to enjoy the gardens. They are at their best this time of year." He gestured to the bench beside him. "Please, join me. I have been reading the volume of poetry you recommended to Caroline. Wordsworth." Hesitantly, Winifred sat, maintaining a proper distance between them. "I thought she might enjoy his observations of nature." "Nature never did betray the heart that loved her," he quoted softly. "You know Wordsworth well, Your Grace." A shadow crossed his face. "My late wife was fond of the late poets. She read them often." It was the first time he had mentioned his wife directly. Winifred remained silent, afraid that any response might cause him to retreat into his customary reserve. "The children resemble her," he continued after a moment. Caroline has her delicate features. Philip, her laugh. They are beautiful children, Winifred said gently. You must be very proud of them. I have given them little reason for pride in return. He closed the book, running his fingers over its leather binding. You were right, Miss Grayson. I have been a prisoner of grief. After Eleanor died. He trailed off, staring into the distance. Winifred waited, hardly daring to breathe. It was a riding accident, he said finally. We were together. The horse was spooked by a gunshot from a nearby hunting party. She was thrown. I tried to reach her. His hand unconsciously moved to the scar at his temple. When I woke, she was gone. I am so sorry, Your Grace, Winifred said, her heart aching for him. The children were there, he continued, his voice hollow. They saw everything. Caroline was screaming. Philip was trying to wake his mother. He closed his eyes. I failed them all. You did not fail, Your Grace, Winifred said firmly. You survived a terrible tragedy. That is not failure, it is endurance. Endurance. He gave a bitter laugh. Is that what you call hiding in one's study with a decanter of brandy while one's children are raised by strangers? I call it grief, she replied quietly. And grief is not a straight path. It wins and doubles back upon itself. Some days we move forward, others we retreat. But as long as we continue to draw breath, there remains the possibility of finding our way through it. He turned to look at her then, really look at her, as though seeing her clearly for the first time. You speak from experience. When my father died, I thought the pain would kill me, she admitted. For months, I could barely rise from bed. Had circumstances not forced me to seek employment, I might still be there, lost in memories and regret. And now? Now I have purpose again. The children need me. That necessity pulled me from my grief when nothing else could. She met his gaze steadily. Your children need you too, Your Grace. Not a ghost of the man you were, but the father you can still be. For a long moment, he said nothing, and Winifred feared she had overstepped yet again. Then, to her astonishment, he reached out and took her hand. His touch was warm, his fingers closing gently around hers. Thank you, Miss Grayson, he said softly. For your honesty. It is refreshing. Before she could respond, the sound of children's voices broke the spell. He released her hand immediately and stood as Caroline and Philip came running around the hedge, faces flushed with excitement from their riding lesson. Papa! Philip exclaimed. I jumped the small hedge today. Mr. Fenton said I have a natural seat. Did he? The Duke's voice was warmer than Winifred had ever heard it. Then you must show me tomorrow. You'll watch us ride? Caroline asked, hope evident in her voice. Yes, he said, glancing briefly at Winifred. I believe it's time I took a more active interest in your activities. The children's faces lit with joy. As they chatted excitedly about their progress, Winifred excused herself, deeply aware that something fundamental had shifted between her and the Duke, something dangerous and improper that she could not afford to acknowledge. That night, unable to sleep, she paced her small room. This cannot happen, she told herself firmly. He is a duke. You are a governess. There is an unbridgeable gulf between your stations. Yet she could not forget the warmth of his hand on hers, the vulnerability in his eyes as he spoke of his wife, the way he had quoted poetry in the sunlit garden. The following weeks brought more changes. The Duke began taking breakfast with the children daily. He observed their lessons, accompanied them on rides, and even joined them for impromptu games of cricket on the lawn. The household staff whispered of the transformation, attributing it to Winifred's influence. For her part, Winifred tried to maintain a professional distance, but found it increasingly difficult. The more time she spent in the Duke's company, the more she saw beyond his title to the man beneath, intelligent, wounded, but possessed of a dry wit that emerged more frequently as his grief receded. Their conversations ranged from educational philosophy to literature to politics. He valued her opinions, challenged her ideas, and treated her with a respect that had nothing to do with her social station. One evening in August, the Duke invited Winifred to join him in the library after the children had gone to bed. "I found some books that might interest you," he explained, his manner casual but his eyes betraying a certain tension. She should have refused. Propriety demanded it. But curiosity, and something deeper she refused to name, led her to accept. The library was lit only by a single lamp and the dying fire. The Duke stood by the bookshelves, several volumes already set aside on a small table. "These are first editions of Mary Wollstonecraft's works," he said as she entered. "I recalled your comments about Caroline's education and thought you might appreciate them." Winifred approached, her breath catching at the sight of the rare books. "These are treasures, Your Grace. I'm honored you would share them." "Eve," he said quietly. She looked up, startled. "I beg your pardon. My name is Eve. When we are alone, I would hear you say it." The impropriety of such a request hung between them. A governess did not address her employer by his given name. "Ever." "I cannot, Your Grace," she whispered. "It wouldn't be proper." He moved closer, his gaze intent. "I find I care less for propriety with each passing day. You have awakened something I thought died with Eleanor, Winifred." The sound of her name on his lips sent a tremor through her. "Please, Your Grace." "We must not what?" "Speak honestly? Feel? Live?" His voice was low, urgent. "For 2 years I have existed in half-light, neither living nor dead. Then you came, with your unfashionable honesty and your refusal to be cowed by my title or my temper. I am your children's governess," she reminded him, though her resolve weakened with every word. "Nothing more. You are the woman who saved my life, twice. Once from fire, and once from the prison of my own making." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Tell me you feel nothing, and I will never speak of this again." Winifred knew she should lie, should deny the feelings that had grown between them. But she had never been skilled at falsehood. "I cannot tell you that," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "But what I feel changes nothing. The world will not accept a duke's interest in a penniless governess as anything but scandal." "The world," he said dismissively. "What has the world done for either of us? It took your father, your security. It took my wife, my peace. Why should we sacrifice what happiness we might find to please it?" Before she could answer, he drew her closer, one hand rising to cup her cheek. "Winifred," he breathed, and then his lips were on hers, gentle at first, then with growing urgency as she responded despite herself. For a moment, she surrendered to the kiss, to the impossible joy of being in his arms. Then reality reasserted itself, and she pulled away. "We cannot," she said, tears threatening. "Your children, your position, can be reconciled with my feelings for you," he insisted. "I am not proposing an illicit affair, Winifred. I am proposing marriage." The word hung in the air between them, impossible and wonderful. Winifred stepped back, shaking her head. "Marriage? You cannot be serious. I have no family, no dowry, no connections. Society would ostracize you. Society, he said with a twisted smile, can go hang. I care for the happiness of my children and myself. The children adore you. And I? He paused, vulnerability flickering across his features. I have come to care for you deeply. Winifred's heart soared even as her mind rebelled against the impossibility of it all. Your Grace, Eve, he corrected gently. Eve, she whispered, testing the name. This is madness. Perhaps. But it is honest madness. He took her hands again. I am not asking for an answer tonight. Think on it. Know that my feelings are genuine and my intentions honorable. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. He raised her hands to his lips, kissing each in turn before releasing them. Good night, Winifred. Good night. Eve. She fled to her room, her mind in turmoil. Marriage to a duke? It was absurd, impossible. Yet the memory of his kiss, the sincerity in his eyes when he spoke of his feelings, made her heart race with forbidden hope. The following morning, reality intruded in the form of an unexpected visitor. Winifred was in the schoolroom with the children when Mrs. Winters appeared at the door. Miss Grayson, your presence is required downstairs. His Grace has a visitor who has asked to meet you. Confused, Winifred followed the housekeeper to the drawing room. As they approached, she heard raised voices, Eve and a woman whose cultured tones dripped with disdain. Utterly beneath you, Eve. Have you lost your mind? A governess. My personal affairs are not your concern, Victoria. They become my concern when you threaten to bring scandal upon our family name with such an unsuitable attachment. Mrs. Winters knocked sharply, and the voices fell silent. Miss Grayson, your Grace, she announced, opening the door. Winifred entered to find Eve standing by the fireplace, his expression thunderous. Seated on the sofa was an elegantly dressed woman of perhaps 40, her handsome features set in lines of disapproval. Miss Grayson, Eve said, his voice carefully controlled. May I present my cousin, Lady Victoria Ravencroft? Winifred curtsied, her cheeks burning. It was clear from the conversation she had overheard that Lady Victoria knew of the Duke's feelings, and vehemently disapproved. So this is the governess, Lady Victoria said, examining Winifred through her lorgnette. Come closer, girl. Let me look at you. Eve's jaw tightened. She is not on display, Victoria. Isn't she? From what I hear, she has been quite conspicuous in catching your attention. Lady Victoria's gaze raked over Winifred. Pretty enough, I suppose, in a common way. Tell me, Miss Grayson, what exactly are your expectations regarding my cousin? Winifred lifted her chin. I expect to fulfill my duties as governess to His Grace's children, my lady. Nothing more. Indeed. Lady Victoria's smile was cold. That is not what I have heard. The servants talk, you know. Late-night meetings in the library, private conversations in the garden. That is enough, Eve snapped. Miss Grayson, you may return to the children. This conversation does not require your presence. Grateful for the dismissal, Winifred curtsied again and turned to leave. Lady Victoria's voice stopped her at the door. You should know, Miss Grayson, that I have taken the liberty of informing Lady Harrington about this situation. As the children's maternal grandmother, she has a vested interest in their upbringing. She will be arriving tomorrow to assess matters for herself. Winifred's stomach dropped. Lady Harrington was known throughout society as a formidable dowager with impeccable standards and considerable influence. Victoria, Eve warned, you overstep. Someone must, his cousin replied. since you seem determined to forget your responsibilities to your name and position." Winifred fled, her brief dream of happiness shattering around her. What had she been thinking? A duke could not marry a governess without causing a scandal that would damage not only his reputation but his children's future prospects. That evening, a note was delivered to her room. "W. Please meet me in the gazebo at midnight. We must talk." Why she knew she should refuse, that meeting him alone at night would only confirm the worst suspicions about her character. But she owed him an explanation, a proper goodbye. The night was clear, stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds. Winifred made her way through the silent gardens to the gazebo, a delicate structure overlooking the lake. Eve was waiting, his tall figure silhouetted against the moonlight. He turned at her approach, relief evident in his expression. "You came." "I shouldn't have," she said, keeping her distance. "Your cousin is right, Eve. This, whatever has grown between us, cannot continue." "Victoria knows nothing of my heart," he replied, moving toward her. "Nor of yours." "She knows the world we live in," Winifred countered. "A world where a duke cannot marry a penniless governess without consequences. I care nothing for those consequences." "But I care for your children," she said gently. What future would they have if their father married so far beneath his station? What ridicule might they face? Caroline will be entering society in a decade. Would you have her prospects dimmed by a stepmother deemed unsuitable? Pain crossed his features. "You speak as though your birth is some insurmountable defect. You are the daughter of a colonel, educated, accomplished, with manners that would shame many of the nobility I know. None of that changes the reality of our situation." She forced herself to continue, though each word felt like a knife to her heart. "Lady Harrington arrives tomorrow. If she finds the slightest hint of impropriety, she could petition for guardianship of the children." "She would not dare." "Wouldn't she?" A grieving widower, behaving erratically, forming an inappropriate attachment to a servant, how would that appear to the courts? Winifred shook her head. "I cannot be the cause of you losing your children." "So you would leave," he demanded. "Return to a life of drudgery and loneliness because society deems our feelings inappropriate?" "Yes," she whispered. "Because sometimes love means putting others before oneself." The word hung between them, love. She hadn't meant to say it, hadn't even fully acknowledged it to herself until that moment. Eve crossed the space between them in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms. "Say that again," he murmured against her hair. "Eve, please, say it again." "That word." Tears filled her eyes. "Love," she repeated. "I love you. God help me, I do. Which is why I must go." He held her tighter. "I will not lose you, Winifred. Not when I have only just found you. There must be a way." "There isn't," she said, pulling back to look into his eyes. "Not unless you would forfeit your children's happiness for your own." "And what of your happiness?" he asked, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Does that count for nothing?" "I have known happiness these past months," she said. "More than I ever expected to find again. That will have to be enough." She rose on tiptoe and pressed a gentle kiss to his lips, a goodbye, a benediction. "I will leave tomorrow, before Lady Harrington arrives. Please do not try to stop me." Before he could respond, she turned and fled back through the moonlit garden, tears streaming down her face. In her room, Winifred packed her few belongings with trembling hands. She wrote 3 letters, one to Caroline and Philip, explaining that a family emergency required her immediate departure, one to Mrs. Winters, thanking her for her guidance, and one to Eve, pouring out her heart in words she could never speak aloud. She would leave before dawn, walking to the village and taking the mail coach to London. Her savings would support her while she sought another position, far from Thornfield, far from the memories that would haunt her. As the first light of dawn crept through her window, she donned her cloak and picked up her valise. A soft knock at her door froze her in place. "Miss Grayson." It was Caroline's voice, small and frightened. "Are you awake?" Winifred opened the door to find both children in their nightclothes, faces pale with worry. "What is it? What's wrong?" "It's Papa," Philip said, his lower lip trembling. "He fell from his horse. The doctor is with him now, but he's asking for you." Fear clutched at Winifred's heart. "How badly is he hurt?" "We don't know," Caroline answered. "Grandmother arrived early and found him. She sent us to fetch you." Abandoning her valise, Winifred followed the children downstairs. Lady Harrington, a formidable woman in black silk, stood outside Eve's bedchamber. "So you are the governess," she said, eyeing Winifred critically. "My son-in-law speaks your name in his delirium." Winifred flushed. "I only wish to help, my lady." "Indeed." Lady Harrington's gaze flickered to the travelling cloak Winifred still wore. "Were you going somewhere, Miss Grayson?" Before Winifred could respond, the door opened, and the doctor emerged. "He is asking for Miss Grayson," he told Lady Harrington. "The fever makes him restless. Perhaps she can calm him." Lady Harrington's lips thinned with disapproval, but she stepped aside. "Very well. But I shall remain present." Winifred entered the dimly lit bedchamber, her heart pounding. Eve lay on the bed, his face flushed with fever, a bandage wrapped around his head. A terrible echo of the night she had saved him from the fire. "Eve," she whispered, taking his hand. "I'm here." His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then clearing as they found her face. "Winifred. You didn't leave." "I couldn't," she said softly. "Not with you injured." "Good," he murmured. "Because I've had an epiphany, lying here contemplating mortality yet again." Despite everything, she smiled. "Have you indeed?" "Yes." He struggled to sit up. "You were right. And wrong." "That is a contradictory epiphany," she said, gently pressing him back against the pillows. "You were right that I must consider my children's happiness above my own," he said, his voice gaining strength. "But wrong to believe those two things are in opposition." Lady Harrington stepped closer, listening intently. "The children need stability, love, guidance," Eve continued. "They need you, Winifred. As do I." He glanced at Lady Harrington. "My mother-in-law came early to warn me that my cousin Victoria was spreading rumors about an unsuitable attachment. She found me riding at dawn, trying to clear my head." "You fell," Winifred murmured. "The horse shied at a pheasant," he said with a grimace. "A humiliating end to a noble bloodline, wouldn't you say?" "Hardly the end," Lady Harrington interjected dryly. "The doctor assures us you will recover fully, though your pride may take longer to heal." "Grandmother has been telling us stories about Mother," Caroline said from the doorway, where she and Philip watched anxiously. "She says Mother would want us to be happy." Lady Harrington's stern expression softened as she looked at her grandchildren. "Eleanor valued love above all else," she admitted. "She married Eve against my wishes, you know. I thought him too reserved, too intellectual for my vibrant daughter." She shook her head. "I was wrong. They were perfectly matched in the ways that mattered." She turned her penetrating gaze on Winifred. "When Victoria wrote to me about a governess who had captured my son-in-law's heart, I came prepared to remove the children from this house. But what I found was not scandal, but healing. The staff speaks of your dedication to the children. The children themselves glow with health and happiness. And my son-in-law has found his way back to the land of the living, Eve finished. Thanks to Winifred. Lady Harrington studied Winifred thoughtfully. You were leaving, she observed. Why? To protect them, Winifred answered honestly. All of them. From scandal, from harm to their prospects and position. A selfless act, Lady Harrington nodded. One that speaks to your character. She straightened her shoulders. Well, there is only one solution that I can see. Mother Harrington. Eve questioned. You must marry her, of course, the older woman declared. Immediately. Before the gossips have time to sharpen their tongues further. I shall announce that I have arranged the match myself, a suitable companion for my grandchildren, chosen from an old military family fallen on hard times. A romantic story of second chances that even the most hardened socialite cannot resist. Winifred stared at her in disbelief. You would support such a marriage? My dear, I have buried a husband and a daughter, Lady Harrington said, her voice gentling. I have learned that life is too precious to waste on empty conventions. My grandchildren need a mother. My son-in-law needs a wife. And you, clearly, need someone to remind you that worth is not measured by the size of one's dowry. She turned to the children. Come, Caroline, Philip. Your father needs rest, and Miss Grayson and I have wedding arrangements to discuss. As they left, closing the door behind them, Eve tightened his grip on Winifred's hand. Well, he said, a smile tugging at his lips. It seems my mother-in-law has given us her blessing. Will you now accept my proposal, or do you require a more formal declaration from bended knee? Winifred laughed through her tears. Given that you're confined to bed with a head injury, I think we can dispense with tradition. Thank God, he murmured, drawing her closer. For I have waited long enough to hear you say yes. Yes, she whispered against his lips. Yes, I will marry you, Eve Ravenscroft. His kiss was tender, a promise of the life they would build together, a life where station and wealth meant less than character and love. 3 months later, Winifred Grayson became the Duchess of Ravenswood in a quiet ceremony attended by family and a few close friends. Lady Harrington's patronage and careful management of the narrative ensured that society received the news with more curiosity than censure. There were whispers, of course. There always would be. But as Winifred stood in the grand ballroom of Thornfield Manor on Christmas Eve, watching her husband waltz with his daughter while Philip raced toy soldiers across the floor with the son of a neighboring baron, she found she cared little for whispers. Happy, my dear? Lady Harrington asked, joining her by the fire. Blissfully so, Winifred admitted. I never imagined such happiness was possible. Eleanor would approve, the older woman said, her gaze on her grandchildren. She always believed that love was the only true nobility. Across the room, Eve caught Winifred's eye and smiled, a private smile, full of promise and memory. In that moment, she knew the truth, that happiness could indeed rise from the ashes of grief, that love could heal the deepest wounds, and that sometimes, the rules of society must bend to accommodate the deeper truths of the heart.